Right, so I've just played through Alan Wake, the remaster. However, I played the original back when it came out in 2010. And then that went through all sorts of licensing issues over the years. I believe the license to the soundtrack lapsed. A banger soundtrack, by the way. And then the game disappeared from Steam. It was one of the earliest examples of a game sort of being just yeeted out of existence, and it helped trigger that conversation around buying digital games and whether that sort of media is safe. Do you really have a license to it, or is it just at the mercy of a rights dispute? But since then, it seems to have come back into existence. And of course, on Epic Store, you've got the remastered version that came out in 2021, and that's the one that I played today. I think I'll have to go back and play the original because the remaster's got some issues, and I don't know how much that is part of the remastering, or is that a PC port problem? I think we might have streamed a little bit of the original a few years ago, just a bit, and I don't really recall these technical problems, so I think I'll go back and have a look, maybe. So yeah, Alan Wake originally came out in 2010. Young Scarlett played that, young, impressionable, naive Scarlett, and ever since then I've held the game in absolute high regard as one of my, let's say, top 10 favorite games of all time. It has a really interesting narrative that is subversive before subversive and deconstructionism and all that crap became popular and became a stand-in for a lack of writing talent, and the idea of deconstructing something was apparently a value add from a writing perspective. Alan Wake is very meta, being that he is a writer in a universe that is in turn being kind of written into existence as we go, just to talk around it. It does walk that fine line as covered sort of in Inception. Don't tell the dreamer that they're dreaming. You have to be very careful at looking at the camera and winking to the audience, because if you don't stick the landing, you've also pointed out to the audience that you're trying to be clever. And I think for the most part, Alan Wake nails it. A big part of it is because it doesn't explain everything to the nth degree, and it still maintains a certain shroud of mystery over a lot of the moving parts, but not enough to be frustrating, but enough to leave you happily speculating. But on the other hand, it does seem a little bit chest puffy, patting itself on the back for how clever it feels itself to be. So yeah, it still holds up, but I suppose old Scarlett has been exposed to more narratives, both good and bad, and what potentially might have seemed like an ironclad narrative in 2010, it's got a little bit of issues when you hold it up to the light, pun intended. Also worth noting, I think there are 2 DLCs for this game, and then there's the sort of pseudo-sequel spin-off American Nightmare, which I played through. I know I played through American Nightmare back at release. Maybe I'll try and squeeze all of that in before the Alan Wake 2 release, but that is bearing down on us now. It's getting quite close. I still have questions, and I want to get as much info covered. There's also a DLC to the game Control, also made by Remedy. It sort of ties all this together and puts it in the same universe, which I haven't played, and perhaps I should. So Alan Wake centers around our protagonist, Alan, who is a fairly high-profile fiction writer. He's written a book series around a character called Alex Casey, which is very much an unsubtle, just Max Payne inside of the universe, also another Remedy property, voiced by the same actor for Max Payne. But coming on the back of concluding that series, I think it was 6 books over 7 years, something ridiculous like that, Alan's now sort of got writer's block, and he has done for a couple of years. So with his wife Alice, goes on a bit of a holiday retreat to a sleepy little American town called Bright Falls for some much needed R&R. Becomes apparent though, it's a little bit of a setup or bait and switch, as Alice has booked him in to talk with a local head shrinker whose speciality is helping those with talents and writer's blocks, and she set up a little office room for him with a typewriter. Honestly, all coming from a place of love, a wife that's just trying to help out her husband that's having a little bit of an issue. However, Alan's a little bit of a prick. Yells and screams and has tantrums like any self-absorbed artiste, I suppose. And in the midst of all that, Alice gets abducted by some mysterious dark force entity, and before you know it, Alan finds himself with a bout of amnesia, crashed in a car, hanging precariously off a cliff with the last week of his life missing. From there, everything starts to kick off. So at its core, Alan Wake is a third-person action-adventure sort of game. The gameplay loop generally has you moving through fairly linear environments with some little side areas, little caches that you can pick up full of ammo. This is the king's share of the actual gameplay. There are some driving sections which are absolutely just dog shit. And unfortunately for the final act finale back end, it ramps the game up to 100, and a lot of the mechanics don't hold up to scrutiny. This is definitely something that is more narrative first and gameplay second. However, the gameplay is still engaging and kind of original. Essentially, the enemies that you fight are shrouded in darkness, and you have two schools of weaponry in your arsenal, and that would be the light side, and then that would be the lead side, bullets and such. If you start shooting some dude that's still got the darkness shroud over him, it's not going to do anything. You need to hose him down with a torch, which uses batteries as ammo. There's also other things like flares, flare guns, flash grenades, and then environmental set pieces where you'll use things like spotlights. But generally speaking, you just lock on with your ADS equivalent button, left trigger say, and you burn down this dude's light meter. Now, once he's stripped and naked from the light, you can poke him full of holes and you shoot with a kind of soft lock-on hip fire mechanic. It works quite well. The shooting is imprecise, but it doesn't need to be. This isn't about headshots or COD level moment-to-moment shooter mechanics. It's a little bit more of a puzzle, dare I say. Burn them down from light, shoot them full of holes afterwards. And like I said, yeah, it's interesting, it's engaging, but it starts to show its cracks, especially in the late game when you start getting mobbed by the AI. The AI seems to be very coded to aggressively deal with you trying to thunder run through sections, which is fine. So if you decide, bugger it, I'm going to try and outrun the AI, that's not going to happen. It's going to run up and it's going to hit you so many times and chain stun you that there's a good chance that running from a fight is a good way to get auto stun locked and killed. And while this seems clearly an anti-stop trying to skip the events kind of mechanic, it can kind of accidentally manifest if you make a bit too much space with enemies, or you maybe get caught in a corner by accident and get body blocked in there. So most of your deaths, though they are few and far between in this mechanic, will be because of a sort of the AI falling over. So narratively, the game has you just follow the bouncing ball, the breadcrumbs as it were, or in this case, they're manuscript pages that Alan clearly wrote, but he has no memory of writing them, and they seem to be predicting things that come true. Now, I know it's an older game, but I don't want to spoil it because it is worth experiencing yourself. Around about the halfway mark, it does take a really big, interesting pivot twist, something that you would never have seen before in most narratives, and for the most part, it sticks the landing really well. But it is laid out that there is some sort of weird narrative component going on where the world is being written into existence, and while Alan's core motivation is to find his wife and rescue her, there is a higher order consideration so as to navigate the environment while also playing by certain narrative rules and tropes to balance the scales, to stop the game from turning into a whole cloth horror slaughter and more of a engaging thriller. If it sounds a little pompous, well, that's because it kind of is a little. However, if you allow yourself to become immersed into it, it's actually really quite original and will keep you engaged well for the most part. It's worth noting that this game absolutely outstays its welcome. It's hard for me to put myself back in the shoes of that time period, but at a certain time, games went from being taught little experiences that were bang on the money into unnecessary bloat. And maybe this was right on the turning point of when that started to become a problem, because this game you could shave a couple of hours out easily and it would be better for it. Also, and I think I touched on it earlier, I'm not sure if this is because of the remaster process or maybe the PC porting. I potentially will check in after I've had a look at the original release. But what feels like was dozens upon dozens of times, you would have a split second of tearing going through the environment, And because of whatever's running this light engine, a lot of the time you get blasted in the face with glaring light. It's really weird. It's not something that's going to cause you to die or really interrupt the flow, but it does break your immersion a bit, especially when you start to notice how frequent it happens. It is disappointing. However, a part of me kind of gives it a little bit of a pass. It's probably not an easy feat to just work with an old engine, an old game, and bring it forward. It's not enough to stop you from playing, but it is also enough for me to mention it here that it can be kind of jarring, and it's not something that's going to go away. Once you start noticing it, it's going to happen 100 times before the end of the game. I did notice something weird when I was killing some of the enemies. They seem to sort of like pop. I don't know. When I say pop, I mean in the next frame, their body shifts about 4 feet higher into the sky. Very strange stuff, and I don't know how to explain it. So yeah, in conclusion, Alan Wake Remastered, it's still quite brilliant. Aspects of its gameplay are dated, as well as its general construction, i.e. bloat for the sake of a price tag bloat. This is one of the early examples of that. And the narrative is really interesting, original, however, a bit pompous at times. In fact, I would say if you're a bit jaded on all the meta deconstruction in a lot of meta writing, then you might not like it. But also inversely, perhaps you want an example of doing meta well, in which case I'd suggest you check out Alan Wake. So that's my review for Alan Wake Remastered. I hope you liked it. Obviously, we're pivoting, we're doing different things now. If you have any feedback, drop a comment, let me know. All the like, share, subscribe, all that sort of crap is really helpful. Joining as a member is super helpful, but mostly I like the comments. I do read them. I enjoy the feedback, giving me an idea of, where I hit, where I missed. Maybe you disagree with me in some way. That's fine. Everyone's polite on the internet. I welcome the discourse. But yeah, I suppose let's finish it up there, and I will catch you guys on the next one.